Our third speaker this time is Angela Glover Blackwell. And Angela is the founder and chief executive director, or chief and the founder and chief executive officer of PolicyLink. And PolicyLink was founded in 1999 by Angela, and she continues to today to drive its mission of advancing economic and social equity. PolicyLink has become a leading voice in the movement to use public policy to improve and access the opportunity for all people and people of color, particularly in the areas of health, housing, transportation, education, and infrastructure. Angela.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm delighted to be here. I could just sit down and say what John said because he was terrific, and I so agree with everything that he said. He really is so good at being able to bring these issues home. It is an honor to be here. I'm particularly pleased to be in the Hubert Humphrey School of Public Affairs. When he died, I was reading the newspaper to my young son that day. He was very young. He didn't know what was going on in the newspaper, but it was a way that I could get the newspaper read and have him sit quietly. So that was just the thing that I used to do in the afternoon. And this particular day, I was reading that the flags were flying at half-staff because of the death of Hubert Humphrey. And he looked up and he said, "What does that mean, flying at half-staff?" I said, "Well, when you live a life and you do really important things, when you die, that's what they do. They fly the staff halfway to really acknowledge the contributions that you've made." He thought about that for a second and he said, thinking of the person who was most important in his life, he says, "When my dad dies, will they fly the flag at half-staff?" And I said, "Well, it depends on what your dad does between now and when he dies." And he thought about that, and then he said, "Okay, but I know when Stevie Wonder dies, they're going to fly the flag at half-staff." Yeah, I said, absolutely. Absolutely was my answer. I am pleased to see you all here in such large numbers to talk about a very important issue for your community and a very important issue for the country. When PolicyLink started in 1999, we started off talking about regional equity. And we did that because our mission was to lift and advance a new generation of policies that achieve economic and social equity. And our commitment was to do that from the wisdom, voice, and experience of people who were working for change in their local communities. And in talking to people who were working for change in their local communities, one of the things that we heard over and over again is that we probably have all of the pieces. We have people who are organizing in our community, people who are working for civil rights, people who are providing services, prenatal care services, early childhood development, youth development, housing, all kinds of services. We have people who are doing policy development, and we have people who are doing policy advocacy. But all of it really seems to be missing an analysis of why so many people are being left behind. And what people were saying is that the advances that had been made through the magnificent civil rights movement that this country had experienced, those advances are being thwarted by our development patterns. That whether we are concerned about access to high-quality education, decent housing, jobs that can provide support for families, those things may now be legal rights, but still people who are Black and Latino cannot get to them because as they gain the right to high-quality education, good schools moved elsewhere. As people gain the right to be able to have any job that they could get based on their qualifications, the good jobs move far away from them. As people had access to neighborhoods where the housing was decent, it turned out that that housing had less value in it, and that housing was less likely to be surrounded by the amenities that people were seeking when they sought to move into that good neighborhood. And so we recognized that if we really wanted to create a society in which everybody could participate and prosper, we had to move beyond talking about rights and begin to include the development pattern as part of the strategic target for how we were going to build a fully inclusive society. And we landed on this notion of regional equity. And regional equity actually focuses you on three things. One is to figure out how to connect to opportunity wherever it might be, which takes us into transportation systems and being able to think about how to have a job linkage program so that we are consciously connecting people to opportunity. The other is to make sure that people can live near opportunity. If we know that where you live is a proxy for opportunity, and in this country it certainly is, and John talked about things that would lead you to that conclusion, where you live determines whether or not you get to go to a good school, whether or not you live in a community that has grocery stores and drugstores and all the things you need. Where you live determines that if you are lucky enough to own a home, whether you have any value in that home that you can pull out in the case of an emergency. Where you live even determines how well you live while you live and how long you live. So being able to live in a community of opportunity, living near opportunity is absolutely important. And that took us into a whole array of work around housing and inclusionary zoning and all kinds of issues. But the most important thing in terms of regional equity is to make sure that every community is a community of opportunity. That every community is a community of opportunity. When you do that, you have absolutely achieved regional equity because everybody, no matter where they live, has access to what it is that they need. So that's how we started off Policy Link, when we were thinking about how to really focus on these issues of opportunity and how to make sure that we had an analysis that was up to the moment. As time has progressed during the maybe 12 years now since we started Policy Link, we have constantly refined our approach and our language and our analysis. These 12 years have been nothing if not a spiraling upward for hundreds of people who have been thinking together about how we understand this and understand it well and come up with strategies that really make a difference. The word equity has become ever more important as we have sought to figure out what are the strategies that we're going to use. And when I use the word, this is all that I mean: just and fair inclusion into a society in which all can participate and prosper. The work of equity is to create the conditions that allow all to reach their full potential. And as we have thought about equity in every realm that you can possibly imagine, we have figured out that equity is really a very interesting challenge in every community across this country. Nakima was amazing as she laid out the story of what's going on here. And as she was talking, I will tell you the thought that I had. Are you embarrassed? That was the thought that I had. Are you embarrassed? I'm from the outside. I was sitting here. I didn't want to turn around and look. I didn't want to because I'm more polite than that. I didn't want to turn around and look because I wondered if you were embarrassed, because I know how embarrassed I would be if that data applied to my family, an extended family, how embarrassed I would be if that data applied to the block that I live on, how embarrassed I am because that data applies to the place where I live. And every day I wake up embarrassed. I'm embarrassed that I can have access to the things that I have access to, and so many people in my community don't. And embarrassment can be a real motivator, particularly when you say it out loud that you're embarrassed. You know, it's one thing to walk around being embarrassed, and it doesn't motivate you. You act like you walk like you're not embarrassed. You don't ever say I'm embarrassed. You assume that other people might be embarrassed, but I'm not embarrassed. I didn't do that. But once you say it out loud that you're embarrassed, I think that begins to motivate you to do something different. And as I look at where we are as a nation and think about how the data that was presented here can be repeated any place in America. We also have national data that reflects the same thing. We have an obesity crisis in America, and children way more than they should. They get less exercise than they should get. But for Black children, the obesity rate is about 37%. For Black teenage girls, clearly 1/3 are obese, not overweight or obese, but obese. For Latino children, the overweight and obesity rate is about 40%. When we look at wealth and the wealth gap, the average wealth for a married family that is white is $167,000. For a single Black family, it's $100. For a single Latino family, it's $120. And I could go through this data for every indicator, but you've heard your own, and so I don't even need to give you the national data because I'm sure you're still stinging from having heard what your data is. Now, what we have to think about as we think about equity in America is that these disparities are horrible, they're troubling, and something needs to be done about it. Something needs to be done about it. But the whole issue takes on greater urgency when you think about what's happening in the nation. Now, you're right here. I want to show you something. Will it run? This is the growth in places that are majority people of color from 1990 to 2040. Majority people of color. Now, these are majority people of color. The places that were white, if we had done 30%, 20%, 10%, you can imagine there would have been color all over that map. But this is what the nation looks like going forward. And when you think about the disparities that you have been talking about here, the disparities that I just mentioned nationally, the disparities that I could have described for an hour if I had wanted to go on and on about them, when you think of them together, we're at a really interesting moment. If this nation is going to be a nation that we all are proud of it because of the democratic values that we hold so dear, if this is going to be a nation in which we continue to have a strong and large and stable middle class, and I think we want that, because you can take any poor country, and what makes it poor is not the absence of rich people. What makes it poor is the absence of a middle class. You have rich people and you have poor people. If we don't want to become that country, if we want to be a place that really can be in the 21st century economy in a way that is truly competitive, we have to have a workforce that can be competitive in the 21st century economy, and we have to figure out how it is that through creativity and innovation and entrepreneurship, we're going to have people who are really contributing. If we want to deal with the problem of climate change, which means that we have to get ourselves using our built environment, stop becoming a throwaway nation where we just keep throwing away communities and infrastructure and moving out and building new places. They can't do that and deal with climate change. We have to use our built environment. If we're going to get people out of the cars and begin to use public transportation, we have to get comfortable sitting next to the other. And we are not comfortable doing that. All of the things that are our challenges for the future demand that we focus on the reality of the future. It means that the people who are going to be the future have to be ready to build and be the nation that we all want to have. I say America can see its future, and it's a 7-year-old Black boy, it's a 5-year-old Latina girl. We know where they live, we know what they need, we know how to invest in their needs, and that's what we have to step up and do. So as I think about the future, it seems that equity, this notion of just and fair inclusion, is not just the thing that we do because it is the moral thing to do. Not just the thing that we do because it is the right thing to do, though it is the moral thing to do, it is the right thing to do, and we should never forget that. We don't want to be a nation that only does something because it's economically viable to do so. We always want to be a nation that comes from a place of what is the right thing to do. So in addition to being the right and moral thing to do, there is an imperative to invest equitably. I actually think that for the future, equity is the superior growth model. And so as we think about how to be able to invest equitably and we go forward, I just want to leave you with some thoughts, because We have an amazing opportunity. Those of us, John and I, and a whole host of people that I could name, for many years have been talking about the power of place, what it means to invest in place. And we have an administration that is picking up on that through the Promised Neighborhoods Initiative, where you actually take the fact that children who have many of the same needs live in the same geographic area. And if we can build a strong school and surround them with everything that they need, we can have children who are reaching their full potential. We understand that we have the opportunity with the Sustainable Communities Initiative to actually build on place in the same way. So if we want to follow the equity principles, this is what we need to do. We need to lead with equity. It cannot be an afterthought. If equity is a superior growth model, we need to lead with equity. When we lead with equity, everybody benefits. Everybody benefits. There are wonderful examples. Market Creek Plaza in San Diego, the Portland Regional Equity Atlas, all are places that are leading with equity. And if we have more time, I can tell you more about them. We need to help our major institutions become champions for equity. We can't just have the NAACP, the Urban League, and the community organizing networks being the ones that are talking about equity. Our universities, our hospitals, our city governments, our county governments, they all have to become champions for equity, because this isn't something that you do on the sideline. It is the most important work that we do. We have to build wealth and assets in the highest need communities that have suffered long-term disinvestment. That is precisely the way that we're going to be able to invest and build equity at the same time and build it in ways that are sustainable. We have to be leaders on the basics. We can't just work on the new thing and say we're going to do that equitably, because what we need to deal with equity is we need to deal with health, we need to deal with education, we need to deal with incarceration, and we have to be leaders about that. Don't leave that conversation for someone else. That's your conversation. The Harlem Children's Zone is a wonderful example of leading on the basics. And last principle is don't celebrate success if you haven't made progress on equity. And since you like that and the stop sign is up, I'll just end there. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela.